My stepbrother called me just adopted and forced me to be his servant because I wasn't real family. So, I revealed everything at his college celebration dinner. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I never imagined that one day I would expose my stepbrother's cruelty at a family dinner with everyone staring, not knowing what hit them. But there I was, standing at the center of a room, filled with tension, my heart racing, knowing this was the moment I would no longer stay silent. I remember the first time I met Colin. He was 16 at the time, a year older than me, and his smile was easy, like he was just a regular guy. He wasn't perfect, but we got along. I thought maybe things would work out with my new family. Mom had always been my world, and when she met Frank at her book club, I was happy for her. I wanted her to be happy. After everything she had done for me, I wanted her to find the happiness she deserved. When they got married 6 months later, I was excited, though nervous. I never thought much about how having Frank and Colin in our small townhouse might change things. At first, it seemed fine, polite conversations, adjusting to a new dynamic. We even played video games together, the three of us, Colin and I, getting along just fine. But that first weekend they went away for their anniversary, everything changed. The house, once a quiet sanctuary for just me and Mom, felt different. I'd always been the quiet, studious kid who had everything figured out, straight A's, plans for college, dreams of a future where my past didn't define me. But when Colin and Frank left for the weekend, everything shifted. The dynamic that seemed so promising, so normal, became something else entirely. I was sitting in the living room, reading a book, when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the kitchen. I didn't think much of it at first, but then Colin appeared, looking at me with that strange, unreadable expression he sometimes wore. "Make me breakfast," he said, as if it were a demand, not a request. I looked up from my book, confused. "You can make your own breakfast," I said, unsure why he was asking me. That's when he said it. "You're just adopted," he sneered. "You're not real family. You should be grateful they even let you stay here." His words hit harder than I expected, and I froze for a moment. "Make breakfast. Earn your place in this house," he repeated, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. I shook my head, trying to laugh it off. "You're insane," I muttered, my voice unsteady. But I knew, even then, that this wasn't just some off-hand comment. It was a challenge, a power play. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed silent as he walked away, the weight of his words sinking into my chest. From that moment on, things began to change. Slowly at first, but undeniably, Colin stopped pretending to be the friendly, cool older stepbrother. Instead, he began to test the boundaries of what he could get away with. He'd leave dishes all over the house and expect me to clean them. He'd throw his laundry in my room, claiming it was now my responsibility. He ate the food I bought with my part-time job money and then said I should be grateful. He even acknowledged my existence. At first, I stayed silent. I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to ruin my mom's happiness. I thought if I kept quiet, if I endured the insults and the demands, everything would go back to normal once they got home. But it didn't. The more I stayed silent, the worse it got. The longer I kept quiet, the more Colin believed he could control me, use me. He'd walk into my room without knocking, take my things, even my phone charger. I couldn't escape him. He started spreading rumors about me at school. "She's a charity case," he told his friends. "My dad married her mom, so now she lives here, doing chores for the real family." I didn't know how to handle it. Some of the kids believed him. Teachers started pulling me aside, asking if everything was okay at home. I lied, of course. I didn't want anyone to know what was really happening. No one could know that I was the one suffering, while everyone else seemed fine. And then it happened, the moment I realized I could no longer stay silent. One evening, I received my college acceptance letter. It was a moment I had dreamed of, worked for, and sacrificed for. But when I showed it to Colin, he ripped it up in front of me, saying I shouldn't waste their money on college when I could just work and pay rent to the real son. That's when I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I couldn't let him control me anymore. So, I began to gather evidence, recordings, pictures, texts, anything that could prove what was really going on. I would show my mom the truth, and for once I would be heard. But that moment, that final breaking point, came much sooner than I expected, and it was during Colin's college celebration dinner. As he proudly announced his acceptance to his dream school, something inside me snapped. I could no longer stay silent, so I revealed everything. It was a quiet weekend when everything started to unravel. Mom and Frank had been planning their trip for weeks. They were excited about their anniversary getaway, and I was just trying to hold it together. At first, I convinced myself I could handle being alone with Colin for a couple of days. It wasn't like we hadn't spent time together before, right? But this time felt different. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through a book, when I heard the front door slam open. I didn't think much of it until Colin's voice echoed down the hallway. "Hey, do you think you could make me something to eat?" I looked up, confused. Colin wasn't the type to ask me for anything, let alone for food. "What?" I asked, not sure I'd heard him correctly. "I'm starving." "Make me something to eat," he repeated, his voice sharp. It wasn't a question, it was a command. I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not your personal chef," I said, trying to keep it light, hoping he would drop it. He didn't. "You're just adopted." He spat, his words hanging in the air like a weight. "You're not really family. You don't get to just lounge around. You need to pull your weight here." My stomach sank. I was stunned, speechless. It wasn't the first time he'd made comments like that, but this was different. The way he said it, so coldly, like he was reminding me of my place in this house, his house. I tried to laugh it off. "You're insane," I muttered, standing up. But it didn't end there. He smirked, stepping closer. "You should be grateful we let you stay. If it wasn't for my dad marrying your mom, you'd still be in foster care, wouldn't you? Think about it. You don't belong here." The words felt like punches, but I couldn't show it. Not then, not with him standing there, looking at me like he was the one in charge. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed my things and walked past him, feeling small, like I didn't belong in my own home. That night, after he threw his dirty dishes in my room and demanded I clean them, I realized this wasn't going to stop. This wasn't a phase. Colin had a way of making me feel like I was invisible. Or worse, like I didn't matter. It was easier to stay silent and let him have his way, just to keep the peace. Mom and Frank were happy, and I wasn't going to be the one to ruin that, but the silence was eating me alive. The more I let Colin walk all over me, the more it hurt. It wasn't just the chores or the insults anymore. It was everything. The way he walked into my room without knocking, the way he ate the food I bought with my own part-time job money, the way he treated me like I was nothing. I stayed quiet for the first few weeks, not wanting to rock the boat. But soon, it was clear he wasn't going to stop. The worst part wasn't just the physical acts, it was the things he said, the lies he spread. He told people at school I was just some charity case my mom had taken in for tax benefits. He told his friends I wasn't part of the family, that I was nothing more than a maid. And for some reason, the more he said it, the more I started to believe it. One day, I went to my locker and found that some of my friends had stopped talking to me. I tried not to think about it. I had enough on my plate. But then the teachers started noticing, asking me if everything was okay at home. I lied, of course. I didn't want to admit the truth. I didn't want anyone to know how bad things had gotten with Colin. I kept thinking it would end. That one day, things would go back to normal, but it didn't. The tension kept building, the abuse kept coming. I couldn't escape. He'd steal from my wallet, eat my food, and when I stood up for myself, he'd just laugh. He started calling me his servant. That was when I knew I couldn't keep pretending. But I couldn't fight him, not yet. Not without something to back me up. So, I started recording everything. Every cruel word, every demand, every moment where Colin would remind me of my place. At first, it was just to protect myself, but soon I realized I had to do more than just record it. I needed to show Mom. I needed to show her the truth. Then came the night when I got my college acceptance letter. My first real step into the future I'd been dreaming of. I was thrilled, of course, but when I showed it to Colin, his face twisted with disgust. "You think I'm going to waste my family's money on your education?" he sneered. "You should just pay rent like any other maid in this house." I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take it anymore. I taped the letter back together, hiding the other letters I had received. I knew I had to do something. I had to stand up for myself for once. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't let Colin win. I had to expose him for what he really was. And that's when everything changed. When Mom and Frank came back from their trip, we all sat down for dinner. It was supposed to be a celebratory evening, a time for everyone to enjoy and share good news. Colin was all smiles, talking about his college acceptance and the future he had all mapped out. But inside, I felt something bubbling up. I couldn't stay silent anymore. So, I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Every word, every cruel moment, every bit of him reminding me I wasn't real family. It was all right there, playing out in front of them. The room went silent as my recordings filled the air. The betrayal in Colin's voice rang out. His words were louder than any argument we'd had before. They were real now, and they were undeniable. Mom froze. Frank's face paled as he looked from the phone to his son. I couldn't look at either of them. Not yet. I had to do this. I had to make them see. "Colin," Mom said, her voice shaking. "What is this?" Colin went silent, his face turning red. He reached across the table, trying to grab my phone, but I pulled it back. That was when I knew I had made the right choice. This was my moment. The silence in the room after the recordings played was deafening. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the house. Colin's face was red, his hands shaking as he sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. I couldn't look at him. Not after everything. I just stared at the ground, willing myself to stay calm. Mom stood up so fast that her chair crashed to the floor. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of shock and fury. Colin opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His face twisted in anger, and he reached for my phone, but I pulled it away from him. "Don't touch it," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. Frank's hand was still on his fork, halfway to his mouth, but he froze when the recording started playing. I saw his eyes flicker between the phone and Colin, the confusion growing on his face. He didn't understand. Not yet. Colin opened his mouth again, trying to explain himself, but Mom wasn't having it. "How long has this been going on?" she demanded, her voice rising. I couldn't look at her, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. 6 months, I said, my voice quieter but still firm. It started the first weekend you two went away together. Mom's face went pale. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything for a moment. She just stared at me like she didn't recognize me, like she didn't know her own daughter. Colin's eyes flickered to the floor, and I could feel his guilt, but it wasn't enough. He didn't deserve my sympathy anymore. I wasn't going to be his scapegoat. "You were supposed to protect me," I said to Mom, my voice shaking now. "You were supposed to protect me from him." She closed her eyes and took a step back, her hand shaking as she gripped the edge of the table for support. The tears started to fall. Slowly, she reached for the phone in my hand, but I couldn't give it to her. Not yet. Not until I had said everything I needed to. I played the next recording. Colin's voice was louder this time, mocking me in front of his friends. "She's like a maid. Free labor. Adopted kids don't count. They're just here to do chores." I watched Mom's face crumble. Frank set his fork down and looked at Colin like he didn't recognize him. His face was pale, the color drained from it. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come. His hand trembled as he reached for the glass of water on the table, but he didn't drink. He just stared at the phone, at the proof of his son's cruelty. "You lied to me," Mom said, her voice breaking. "You lied to me about her, about everything." Colin tried to speak, to explain himself, but nothing came out. The truth was out now, and he couldn't take it back. I didn't need to say anything else. The room was heavy with the silence of truth finally being told. I tapped the screen again and played the final video, the one where Colin had ripped up my college acceptance letter. I hadn't realized how important that letter was to me until it was gone. Until he tore it to pieces in front of me. His words echoed in my mind as I watched him rip the paper. "Why waste their money on your education? You should be paying rent to the real son of this house." Mom gasped when the video played. Her hands covered her mouth, her whole body shaking with the force of the betrayal. Frank just stared, eyes wide, his mouth hanging open. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her tears fell freely now, her body shaking with the weight of the realization. I looked at her, but I couldn't answer. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't told her because I didn't want to ruin her happiness. I didn't want to hurt her. She'd found someone she loved, someone who made her happy. I couldn't bring myself to destroy that for her. "It wasn't your fault," I said, even though I didn't believe it. I couldn't make her feel more guilty than she already did. Frank stood up now, walking over to Colin, who hadn't moved from his seat. The silence between them felt like an eternity. When Frank finally spoke, his voice was low, strained. "Is this true?" he asked Colin. Colin didn't answer. His face was pale, his lips pressed together in a tight line. He couldn't deny it anymore. Mom's voice was full of rage as she turned on Colin. "You need to leave. Now," she said, her words sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. Colin opened his mouth to protest, but Mom's eyes were like fire. "You're leaving tonight. You're going to stay with your uncle until we figure this out. Colin looked to Frank, his eyes wide, but Frank didn't say anything. He didn't even look at him. Frank just stood there, staring at the phone in his hands. He didn't know how to react. I could see it in his eyes. He felt betrayed too. But by his own son. I didn't care anymore. I didn't care about Colin's excuses or his guilt. All I cared about now was that I was finally heard. I turned away from the table, unable to look at either of them anymore. I walked out of the room, my heart still racing, but a small part of me felt lighter. For the first time in 6 months, I didn't feel invisible. And I wasn't going to be his servant any longer. The silence after the dinner confrontation was suffocating. I could still feel the weight of the truth in the air, thick and heavy like it was pressing down on all of us. I wanted to run, to get away from the scene we'd just created, but I couldn't. I had to stay, had to face whatever came next. Mom was still standing, her eyes wide with shock, her body trembling as she stared at Colin. Frank hadn't moved either. His eyes were on his son, but there was a distance now, something cold that hadn't been there before. Colin finally spoke, his voice shaky. "This isn't what you think." He tried to sound convincing, but I could hear the desperation behind his words. Mom's face went from pure rage to confusion, then to something that looked almost like disbelief. "Not what I think," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just listened to you on those recordings, Colin. I heard you call my daughter a maid. I heard you tear up her college letter." Colin's hands were clenched into fists, his knuckles turning white. He didn't speak again. There was nothing more he could say, and we both knew it. I didn't want to look at him anymore. I turned to face Mom, my chest tight. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how much it hurt that she hadn't seen it sooner. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I just stood there, waiting for her to say something. Mom's voice trembled as she spoke again. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, her eyes never leaving Colin. 6 months, I said quietly, my voice hoarse from the emotion I was holding back. 6 months of this. Of him treating me like I don't matter. Colin's face shifted, there was a flicker of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by defiance. He glanced at Frank for support, but Frank didn't even acknowledge him. Frank was still staring at the phone, at the recordings. Mom was shaking now, visibly shaken by the weight of what I'd revealed. She took a step back from the table, one hand clutching her chest, like she was struggling to breathe. "I didn't know," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't know he was treating you like this." "You didn't see it?" I asked, my voice breaking. "You didn't notice how bad it was getting? How he kept pushing me, making me feel like I wasn't part of this family?" Mom's face crumpled as she stepped closer to me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I should have protected you. I should have seen what was happening. I've failed you." My heart broke a little, but I didn't know how to respond. I hadn't been able to protect myself, so how could I expect her to protect me? She was blinded by her love for Frank, just like I had been blinded by my need to make her happy. "I didn't want to ruin your happiness," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I didn't want to be the reason things went wrong. I thought if I stayed quiet it would get better." Mom's eyes filled with tears as she pulled me into a tight hug.
"Oh, baby,"
she murmured. "You should never have had to stay quiet. You should have come to me. I should have seen it. I should have protected you." Frank finally spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Colin," he said, his tone serious. "Is this true? Is everything she said true? Colin didn't answer right away. He just stared at his father, his face pale. When he finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. Yeah, he muttered, his eyes downcast. It's all true. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after all the lies and cruelty, there was no denying it now. I had the proof, and Colin couldn't hide anymore. Mom stepped back from me, her hands shaking as she wiped her eyes. I want you to leave, she said, her voice low but firm. Now. Colin opened his mouth to argue, but Mom raised her hand, silencing him. No. You need to leave. You're not welcome here anymore. Frank stood up, his expression hardening as he turned to Colin. Go upstairs and pack your things. You're staying with your uncle tonight. We need time to figure this out. Colin didn't protest. He didn't say anything at all. He just got up slowly, his head down, and trudged up the stairs. I couldn't watch him leave. I turned to face the table, my hands gripping the edge, trying to steady myself. The emotional weight of what had just happened was crashing down on me. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. Frank walked over to me, his face unreadable. I didn't know, he said, his voice almost apologetic. I thought you were just adjusting to the changes. I didn't know it was this bad. I didn't say anything. What could I say? He'd been blind to the truth for months, and now he was paying the price for it. Do you want to talk about it? Frank asked, his voice softer now. No, I said, shaking my head. Not right now. I just need some time. Mom nodded and turned to Frank. We'll figure this out. We'll talk about what's next. But right now, I just need to be with her. Frank nodded, his eyes full of regret. I understand. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving me and Mom alone. I sank into one of the chairs at the table, my hands shaking as I tried to calm myself. Mom sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders, holding me close. You did the right thing, she whispered. I'm proud of you. I just wish I'd seen it sooner. I couldn't keep pretending, I said quietly. I couldn't keep living like this. Not anymore. Mom squeezed me tighter, her voice breaking as she spoke. You don't have to. You don't have to pretend anymore. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of everything finally sink in. It was over. The silence. The lies. The constant fear. It was all over, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The next few days felt like a blur. Colin was gone, but his presence still loomed over the house, thick and suffocating. The silence was overwhelming, and everything felt different now. I couldn't escape the weight of the truth we had all just faced, and I couldn't ignore the guilt and shame that hung in the air, even though it wasn't mine to bear. Mom and Frank didn't know how to act around me. They'd both been shaken to their core by what had happened. I knew they were trying, but their attempts to comfort me felt awkward. The silence between us was thick, like no one knew where to start or how to heal. It wasn't until the next evening that I finally broke. We were sitting at the dinner table, and Frank tried to start a conversation about the weather, something so mundane and insignificant, but it felt like an attempt to put everything back to normal. How was work today? He asked, his voice tentative, as if he was testing the waters. I didn't want to talk about the weather. I didn't want to pretend like everything was fine. I put my fork down with a soft clink, the noise louder than I intended. Mum, I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion, you have to know how bad it's been. For months, I've been living in fear. She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, and looked at me with wide eyes, as if I'd just dropped a bomb. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. I know, honey, and I'm so sorry. I should have known. I should have protected you. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to yell at her for not seeing it sooner. Another part of me just wanted to hold her and tell her it wasn't her fault, even though a small part of me still blamed her. Frank reached across the table, his hand shaking slightly as he placed it on mine. "We're going to fix this," he said, his voice low but firm. "We're going to make it right. But how? How do you fix something that's been broken for so long? How do you erase the pain and the fear that had built up in me over the past 6 months?" I pulled my hand away from Frank's and stood up, pacing around the room. I could feel my heart racing. I didn't want to fight, but it was hard to stay silent now that the truth had been laid bare. "How are we supposed to fix this?" I asked, my voice trembling with frustration. How do we fix what Colin did to me? How do we fix how he made me feel worthless every single day? Mom stood up too, her eyes full of tears. "I'll make it right, Reagan. I swear I will." "You can't," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I don't want you to fix it. You can't fix what's been done. You can't change the past. You can only help me move forward." She nodded, a single tear falling down her cheek. I know I can't change the past. But I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're okay. You're my daughter, Reagan. You always have been." Those words, simple but sincere, hit me harder than I expected. For the first time in what felt like ages, I felt like maybe things would be okay. Maybe we could rebuild, even if it would take time. The next few days were filled with awkward conversations and half-hearted attempts to return to normal. Frank tried his best to make me feel comfortable. But there was no going back. Not yet. I was still processing everything that had happened, and it felt like the world had shifted beneath my feet. Then, the day came when Colin came back. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to face the person who had made my life hell for so long. But Mom and Frank insisted that we needed to have a conversation, that we needed to address everything before we could move forward. I couldn't hide from it anymore. Colin stood at the door, his shoulders hunched, his eyes red. I could see the guilt on his face, but it didn't change anything. I didn't feel sorry for him. "Not yet. You can sit down," Mom said, her voice steady despite the tension. "We need to talk." I stayed standing, my arms crossed over my chest as I watched him. He didn't look the same. His usual cocky demeanor was gone. He looked smaller, almost defeated. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I know I've done a lot of messed up things, and I can't take them back, but I'm sorry. I hurt you, Reagan, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness." I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he'd destroyed me, but another part of me wanted to see if he really meant it. I had to know if he was actually willing to change, or if this was just another one of his manipulations. "You're sorry," I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "But words aren't enough anymore, Colin. You don't get to say sorry and expect everything to be okay. You need to show me you've changed. You need to prove it." His eyes widened. "What do you want from me? What do you expect me to do?" I took a deep breath. "I expect you to stop using my adoption against me. I expect you to treat me like a person, not a servant. I expect you to apologize to the people you hurt. You're going to have to do the work, Colin. Not just say sorry. You need to show me that you're really sorry." Mom nodded, her voice calm but firm. "This is the first step. We're going to work through this as a family. We're going to go to therapy, all of us. You can't keep running from your actions. You have to face them. Colin looked down at his feet, his face crumpled in defeat. I'll do it, he said quietly. I'll do whatever it takes. I want to make things right. I wasn't convinced, but I had to give him a chance. I couldn't keep living in fear, unable to move forward. I had to let go of the anger, even if it was hard. I don't forgive you yet, I said, my voice soft. But I'll give you a chance to prove yourself. The silence that followed was thick, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt like a new beginning, a chance for all of us to start over. Colin nodded, and for the first time, I believed him. Maybe, just maybe, we could begin to heal. The days following Colin's forced departure felt like a strange limbo. The house was quieter than I ever remembered it. The usual hum of the television, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, everything seemed muted, like the world was holding its breath. Mom and Frank tried to go on with their routines, but I could tell the guilt was eating at them both. They hadn't fully processed what had happened, and neither had I, but we were all trying to figure out what came next. It wasn't just about Colin anymore. It was about me too, about what I had endured, about what I still needed to heal from. The silence between Mom and me felt heavy. She wanted to talk, I could see that, but I wasn't sure I was ready. Every time she looked at me, it was like she was waiting for me to say something. Anything, to make it feel okay again. But I didn't know what to say. The first family therapy session was hard. It was scheduled just a few days after Colin's departure. And I couldn't avoid it. Mom insisted that we go, and at this point, I couldn't keep hiding from the truth. I had to face it, just like they did. Brady, our therapist, greeted us when we walked into his office. He had a calming presence, one that seemed to soften the tension in the room. His office was small but warm, with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle and soft lighting that made it feel more like a living room than a place where we'd air out our dirty laundry. We all sat down, and for a long while no one spoke. It felt like everyone was waiting for the other to break the silence. I could feel the weight of the last few days pressing down on all of us. Brady started gently, asking us to talk about what had happened and how we were feeling. Mom was the first to speak, her voice trembling as she explained how she'd failed to see the signs of Colin's mistreatment. I didn't realize how bad it was, she said, her voice breaking. I thought you were just adjusting. I thought it was normal teenage stuff. But I see now that I was blind to it. I could see the guilt in her eyes. The kind of guilt that wasn't easy to let go of. But Brady didn't press her for answers. He just let her speak. Frank, sitting beside her, spoke next. He looked completely drained. His usual confidence had been replaced by an almost defeated air. I didn't know either, he admitted, his voice low. I thought everything was fine. I didn't want to believe Colin could do something like this. I thought maybe Reagan was just being, well, a teenager too. But I see now that I made excuses for him. I wanted to shout at him, to tell him how many times I'd begged for help, how many times I dropped hints that something was wrong. But I didn't. I just sat there, feeling like I was invisible. Brady turned his attention to me, gently encouraging me to talk when I was ready. I took a deep breath and let the words spill out like a dam breaking open. I just feel like I didn't matter, I said, my voice cracking. Like I was never really part of the family. Colin always made me feel like I was. Just a burden. Tears welled in my eyes as I spoke. but I kept going. I was always trying to make Mom happy, trying to keep the peace. But it never felt like enough. I don't know what to do now. Brady nodded thoughtfully, never rushing me, just letting me speak. It's normal to feel lost after a betrayal like this, he said softly. You've been carrying a lot of pain, Reagan. But it's important to remember that you are enough. You matter, and you've always mattered. His words were gentle, but they felt foreign, like they didn't belong to me. I didn't know if I could believe them. Not yet, but I appreciated that he said them. I didn't feel alone in the room anymore, not as much. We spent the next hour talking about the past, about everything that had led to this point. Brady asked us questions, gave us space to air out our emotions, and helped us see where things had gone wrong. It was uncomfortable, to say the least, but it was necessary. After the session, Mom was quiet as we drove home. I could tell she wanted to say something, but she didn't. I appreciated that. I didn't know what to say either. Colin was still at his uncle's house. Mom had told him he couldn't come back until he'd done the work. Therapy, apologies, a genuine change of heart. The list was long, and I didn't know if he was ready for it. But I knew that I couldn't keep living like this, suffocating in silence, pretending everything was fine. The days that followed were a slow crawl. The tension wasn't gone, not yet, but we were starting to find small ways to move forward. Frank started spending more time with me, trying to make up for the months of neglect. He took me out for ice cream one evening, just the two of us, and we talked. I didn't know how to feel about him. He was trying, but it felt like too little too late. How's school going? He asked, his voice casual, but I could hear the underlying tone of concern. Fine, I replied, my eyes staring out the window. I'm just tired. He nodded, understanding. You don't have to hide it, you know. I should have been more involved, Reagan. I should have listened when you needed me to. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to forgive him yet, but I appreciated that he was trying. For once, he wasn't pretending everything was fine. That night, I went to bed feeling exhausted. Mentally, emotionally, physically. Everything felt like it was in pieces, but at least those pieces were out in the open now. It wasn't fixed, not by a long shot, but it was real, and that was the first step toward healing. The next therapy session was scheduled for the following week, but I couldn't stop thinking about Colin. I hadn't heard from him since the dinner, and part of me was afraid he'd never change. Part of me was afraid that things would go back to how they were. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a chance to find my own voice, to stand up for myself. And that, at least, was a step in the right direction. I didn't know how long it would take, or if we'd ever get back to normal, but I knew I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. I wasn't going to let anyone walk over me again. The following week was filled with tension, and I could feel it lingering in every corner of the house. Colin had stayed with his uncle since that night, and even though things were quiet, the silence was deafening. It felt like we were all holding our breath, waiting for something, anything, to change. Mom and Frank were doing their best to give me space, but there was an undercurrent of nervous energy in the house, like they weren't sure what to do next. I wasn't sure what to do next either. After everything had been exposed, I found myself in uncharted territory. I wasn't sure who I was in this new version of my family, and I didn't know if I could trust that the changes we were trying to make would last. But despite the uncertainty, there was something different. I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had the control. I had the choice to move forward, even if it felt slow and difficult. A few days after our first therapy session, I found myself sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone. The news that Colin was attending therapy came as a shock. He hadn't reached out to me, not that I was surprised. But I knew deep down this was a step, a real one. Mom sat down beside me, her presence warm but cautious. "How are you feeling about the therapy sessions?" she asked quietly. I shrugged, keeping my gaze on my phone. "I don't know. It's hard to believe anything will really change. But I guess it's a start." I didn't meet her eyes, but I could feel her watching me. She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're angry with me, Reagan. I understand that. But I'll keep doing the work. For you. And for our family." "I don't know if I can forgive him," I said, the words coming out heavier than I expected. "I don't know if I can forgive you either, Mom." Her face fell slightly, but she didn't interrupt me. She just waited, her hand reaching for mine. I didn't pull away. I let her hold my hand, though the gesture didn't immediately erase the pain I felt. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know words aren't enough. I can't change the past, but I'm here. I'm going to make it right. I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you." I didn't say anything in response. What could I say? I wasn't sure what she could do to fix this. I wasn't even sure what I wanted her to do. I was so caught up in my own anger, my own hurt, that it was hard to even imagine healing. But I knew she was trying. I saw it in the way she spoke, the way she looked at me. We sat there in silence for a while, just letting the quiet hang between us. I could feel the weight of it, the unspoken things we hadn't said, the things I wasn't ready to admit, even to myself. That evening, we had another therapy session. Mom, Frank, and I sat in our usual spots in the circle of chairs, the room warmer than I remembered it. Brady greeted us with his calm, steady presence, as usual, but there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. I could feel it, like everyone was waiting for something, waiting for Colin. When he finally walked into the room, I felt a surge of emotion, anger, resentment, and something deeper, something I couldn't quite place. He looked different. His usual cocky demeanor was gone, replaced with an almost fragile vulnerability. He didn't look like the person I'd spent months trying to avoid. He looked like someone who had been broken not by me, but by his own actions. "I know I've messed up," Colin said, his voice hoarse. "I know I've hurt all of you. I can't take back what I've done, but I want to make things right. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I'm asking for a chance to change." I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he'd hurt me, how much he'd made me feel small. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way he looked at me, not with the usual contempt, but with guilt, genuine guilt. Maybe it was the exhaustion in his eyes, the understanding that this wasn't something he could fix with a simple apology. Brady gave us space to process, his calm voice reminding us that healing wasn't linear. "It's okay to feel angry," he said gently. "But it's also important to acknowledge the progress, no matter how small it may seem." I looked over at Colin, trying to understand if this was real, if his apology, his attempt to change, was genuine. "Are you really sorry?" I asked quietly, my voice shaking just slightly. "Do you really want to change, or is this just because Mom and Frank are making you do it?" Colin didn't flinch. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I didn't see the arrogance I'd grown used to. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice softer now. I've been an idiot. I know that. I've treated you like crap, and I can't take it back. But I want to try. I want to fix this. I want to be a better person. I didn't know if I believed him. I didn't know if I ever would. But I knew I couldn't stay stuck in the anger and the hurt. I had to let go, even if just a little. Okay, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. We'll see. The next few days felt like a strange mixture of awkwardness and tentative hope. Colin was trying, really trying, to make amends. He started taking responsibility for his actions in a way that surprised me. He apologized to Mom, to Frank, and even to me in his own way. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't immediate, but it was something. We weren't a perfect family, not by a long shot. But for the first time, it felt like we were moving in the right direction, one small step at a time. The days after Colin's return felt like a slow, uneasy crawl forward. Things weren't perfect. In fact, they were far from it. The house was quieter now, the tension still hanging like a storm cloud over everything. But there was something different, something that hadn't been there before. There was a chance, a real chance to start fresh, even if it was only a small one. I still didn't know if I could forgive him. I wasn't sure what forgiveness looked like anymore, or if it was something I even wanted to give. But I could see the effort Colin was making. For the first time, he was acknowledging his mistakes, not just with words, but with actions. It wasn't easy for me to accept. But it was something. It wasn't just Colin, though. It was also Mom and Frank. The three of us were working on rebuilding the pieces of our family, but it felt like a delicate balancing act. Each of us was still finding our place in this new dynamic, unsure of where we fit. Mom and Frank were trying to make up for their mistakes, trying to make me feel safe again. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. One evening after dinner, Mom and I sat down at the kitchen table. Frank had gone to the store, leaving us alone. It was a rare moment of quiet, and I could feel the weight of everything between us. Reagan, Mom began, her voice soft, I know things aren't easy, but I want you to know how sorry I am. I should have seen it. I should have protected you better. I failed you as a mother. Her words were a heavy blow, but not in the way I expected. I thought I would feel angry, more anger than I already had. But instead I felt sad, deeply sad. You didn't fail me, I said, my voice catching slightly. But you didn't see it. No one did. Mom reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. I know, she whispered. I should have noticed. I should have asked you more. But I got caught up in everything, caught up in Frank, in our life together, and I didn't see you, Reagan. I didn't see how much you were suffering. I didn't know how to respond to that. The truth was that I wasn't sure I could ever completely forgive her for not noticing sooner. But there was a part of me that was beginning to understand. She hadn't been looking away on purpose. She had just been blind. I don't blame you, I said finally. I'm angry, but not at you. I think I'm just angry at everything, at how all of this happened. At Colin, at myself. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded slowly. You don't have to forgive me right away, Reagan, but I'm going to keep showing you that I'm here for you. Every single day. I didn't know if I believed her, but I wanted to believe that, in time, things could be better. But even as I sat there with her, holding her hand, part of me still felt like something was missing. Like I was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. The following weeks passed in a blur. Colin continued to attend therapy, And I could see a change in him, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for me to trust him again, and it wasn't enough for me to feel like things would ever go back to the way they were. Mom and Frank were trying, really trying. Frank started spending more time with me, asking me about my day, about school, about anything that could help bridge the distance between us. It was awkward at first, but it was a start. And that's what I kept telling myself. It was a start. I still didn't know if I would ever forgive Colin for everything he'd done. Maybe I wasn't ready for that. But I did know one thing: I wasn't the same person I had been before. The girl who had been afraid to speak up, afraid to stand up for herself, was gone. She had been replaced by someone who was learning to use her voice. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important thing. It was the day of my final therapy session with Brady that I felt the first real sense of closure. We were sitting in the circle of chairs, the same as always, but this time, I wasn't filled with the same anxiety I'd had before. There was a quiet strength in me now, something I hadn't known I was capable of before. Brady asked us all to reflect on the progress we'd made and to share where we were now. Frank spoke first, his voice steady, but emotional. I've learned that I need to listen, really listen, to both of you, and I need to take responsibility for not seeing what was happening. Mom nodded beside him, her voice filled with regret. I've failed you both, but I'm here now. I'm going to keep working to be the mom you deserve. I looked at them, my parents, the people who had failed me, but were now trying to make things right. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was just ready to move forward. When it was my turn, I hesitated for a moment, gathering my thoughts. I'm angry. I started, my voice a little shakier than I expected. But I'm not angry at you anymore, Mom. Or at you, Frank. I'm angry at everything that happened. I'm angry at Colin for the way he treated me, and I'm angry at myself for letting it happen. But I'm learning to speak up, to say no when I need to. I'm learning to be okay with not having all the answers, and I'm learning to forgive myself, even if I'm not sure how to forgive him. There was silence in the room for a moment, but it wasn't heavy. It felt like a release, like something had shifted. Brady smiled, his voice gentle. You've made incredible progress, Reagan. This isn't an easy road, but you're walking it. And that's something to be proud of. When we left that session, I felt a strange sense of peace. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't over. But it was a new beginning, a chance to rebuild, to heal. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to face the future. And maybe, just maybe, I could start to believe that things could get better